How the Phoenicians made writing accessible and changed history. Approximately 1050 BC. 1. Writing as power, not tool. For centuries, writing is controlled by a small, trained elite, functioning less as a tool and more as a gatekeeper of power. In Egypt, under rulers like Ramesses II, hieroglyphs are carved into stone, while in Mesopotamian cities such as Ur and Babylon, cuneiform is pressed into clay. Both systems complex, time-consuming, and restricted to scribes. As a result, writing remains inaccessible to most, reinforcing control rather than enabling communication. Point 2. Collapse and opportunity. Approximately 1200 to 1050 BC. But history rarely moves in straight lines, and by around 1200 BC, the late Bronze Age world begins to collapse. As long-standing powers across the eastern Mediterranean weaken or fall, trade networks fracture, and political stability gives way to fragmentation. Out of this disruption, new actors rise. Along the Levantan coast, the Phoenicians, centered in cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, step into this changing world, not as conquerors, but as connectors, rebuilding and expanding trade routes across the Mediterranean. By around 1050 BC, these cities emerge as dominant maritime powers. Their influence shaped not by territorial empires, but by movement, exchange, and adaptability. 3. A world that moves. The Phoenician world is defined by motion. Ships arrive and depart constantly, carrying timber from Lebanon, metals, glass, and the prized purple dye extracted from murex shells, a product so valuable that it becomes associated with royalty itself. Trade stretches outward toward Cyprus, North Africa, and eventually as far as the Iberian Peninsula, creating a network that depends on speed, clarity, and trust between distant partners. Within such a system, communication cannot afford to be slow or overly complex, and yet the existing writing systems, whether Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, remain tied to tradition, requiring time and specialization that this new world does not allow. And so, rather than adapting themselves to writing, the Phoenicians adapt writing to their world. For the alphabet emerges. Approximately 1050 BC. Around the 11th century BC, the Phoenicians reduce writing to its essentials, creating a system built on roughly 22 symbols, each representing a sound rather than a full idea or object. This consonantal alphabet, what modern scholars call an abjad, removes the need for hundreds of characters and replaces them with a compact, efficient structure that can be learned and used far more easily. The system is not ornamental, nor does it attempt to preserve the visual symbolism of earlier scripts. Instead, it is direct and functional, designed for clarity rather than ceremony, and because of that, it fundamentally changes who can participate in writing. Where older systems demand years of training, this one lowers the barrier, allowing merchants, traders, and administrators to engage with writing directly, without relying entirely on specialized scribes. 5. Evidence in stone and distance. This transformation is not theoretical. It leaves traces that survive across both time and geography. The Ahiram sarcophagus from Byblos, dating to the 10th century BC, preserves one of the earliest known Phoenician inscriptions, while finds such as the Nora stone in Sardinia demonstrate just how far the script travels, carried across the Mediterranean alongside trade goods. These inscriptions mark a shift, not just in how writing looks, but in how it moves. No longer fixed to monumental spaces, but embedded within networks of exchange. 6. Writing in motion. That is within this movement that the true nature of the system becomes clear. As writing begins to appear not only in formal inscriptions, but in everyday contexts, on cargo, in trade records, in agreements made between ports. A merchant aboard a ship leaving Tyre might mark goods before departure, while another in a distant harbor records a transaction upon arrival. Each act performed quickly, efficiently, and without the need for extensive training. This is not writing as spectacle. It is writing as function. And because it functions so well, it spreads. Expansion and Phoenician reach. To 900 to 600 BC. As Phoenician influence expands between the 9th and 7th centuries BC, their writing travels with them, moving into settlements across the Mediterranean, including Carthage, traditionally founded by Dido around 814 BC. From these hubs, the alphabet reaches Sicily, Sardinia, and the Iberian Peninsula, embedding itself within diverse cultures and trade networks. Its simplicity allowing it to adapt rather than resist change. Point 8. Greek transformation. Approximately 800 BC. When the Greeks encountered the Phoenician script, likely through sustained trade contact, they recognized its utility but also its limitations, particularly the absence of written vowels. Rather than abandoning the system, they modify it, introducing vowel sounds and expanding its expressive capacity, creating a version of the alphabet that can more fully capture spoken language. From this adaptation, the system evolves further, passing into the Latin alphabet and eventually shaping the scripts that dominate much of the modern world. 9. The shift in power. As the alphabet spreads and evolves, writing begins to lose its exclusivity. It does not happen instantly, nor does it eliminate older systems entirely, but the barrier has been weakened. And with that weakening comes a redistribution of access. As more individuals gain the ability to record, communicate, and participate in written culture for those who once controlled writing. This shift is not neutral. Because when writing becomes easier to learn, it becomes harder to control. Point 10. The first crack. The Phoenicians did not set out to reshape human history. They were responding to the needs of a fast-moving, interconnected world, creating a system that allowed writing to keep pace with trade and communication. But in doing so, they introduced something far more disruptive than complexity ever was. They made writing accessible, and that accessibility marks the first crack in a system that had held for millennia. A fracture that does not close once it appears, but instead widens, carrying writing beyond its original boundaries and into the hands of those who will use it not only to record, but to think, to question, and to reshape the world around them.